I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but when God came to earth, he did so to start a family. There was a reason God came to earth. He did so to start a family. Ephesians 3:14 and 15 read, "For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name." Wow. Every family derives its name. The purpose of God coming to earth was to establish a family. Now, not a conventional family of dad and mom and sister and brother, but a spiritual family. A spiritual family for every family in heaven and on earth. For all races, all languages, all cultures, all nationalities, all ages. Our Lord left the cozy confines of heaven for a rough and tumble earth with the goal of building a family. And here in Ephesians chapter 3, Paul tells us that after living 30 some odd years among us, sharing our muck and mire on earth, at 30 years old, he began his ministry, and then after he was crucified and resurrected, he ascended back to heaven, mission accomplished with an eternal family forever established. When we think of starting a family, we think of an eager young man leaving his parents and going out to find a wife and them falling in love and marrying and establishing a life together. And then probably at some point in the future comes a baby. Offspring from the marriage is a sign that the young man and the young woman are well toward their goal of growth and maturity. They have taken on responsibility, not just for themselves, but for other eternal life. But within God's family, the baby was the beginning. Jesus didn't wait until he was a young man to start his family. He began his family building as an infant. Even as a lowly baby, he invited the world to follow him. Mary and Joseph embraced him first. Then the shepherds were summoned. And then Persian kings were guided to his side. And every year, every day of every year, people are given the same invitation to come be a part of this eternal family that God came to earth to establish. Once a mom and daughter were unpacking the family's ceramic nativity set, and it was time to decorate for Christmas, and the 3-year-old was able to identify each piece as it was pulled from the wrapping paper. As most of us do, we do this at our house. Let me rephrase that. Diane does this at our house. And so the 3-year-old girl is pulling them out and says, there's the donkey, there's Mary, there's one of the shepherds, there's Joseph. But when the little girl saw the ceramic baby Jesus molded into the manger as a single piece, she got so excited, she said, and there's the baby Jesus in his car seat. It's sort of amazing to think, isn't it, that if Jesus had been born, if God had waited to introduce the Messiah to the world in our day and time, in our age, that Jesus would be strapped into a car seat. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever tried to put a car seat in? It takes an engineering degree. Just as a tip, if you take it down to the fire station, they'll do it for you. I know. But imagine God in a car seat. The God who steers the universe, whose sovereignty cuts the entire channel of history, would need to be strapped in and buckled into a car seat before he could take off and ride in your car. You see, everybody loves a baby. Everybody oohs and ahs at a baby. The hardest of men soften around an infant. In fact, bring a baby into this auditorium for the first time after it's been born on a Sunday, and the other young mothers and many others will all circle around it and make sure everybody wants to see the baby. And that's why many mothers today hold their baby out for 4, 6, 8 weeks, because they know everybody's going to want to see their baby. And they're trying to protect them from all those germs. And it's one of the reasons why God came into the world as a baby. It was the most inviting, welcoming, non-threatening, least intimidating form he could take. Have you noticed at the mere sight of a baby, people smile? Their spirits soften? Nobody that I've ever seen or known curls up their nose at a baby. Nobody rolls their eyes at a baby. Nobody stiffens their chin at a baby. Nobody clenches their teeth at a baby. Nobody gets defensive around a baby. A baby is about as disarming a creature as you can possibly imagine. Look at a baby and it softens your heart. You drop your guard. A person becomes more open. It's a wonderful thing to behold. But when God came to the earth, was incarnated, he chose to come as a baby. It's such an incredible and revolutionary thought that nobody could have possibly thought of it except for God. That's the truth. And so God came to earth as a baby, and that baby came, Ephesians 3 says, to start a family. But God added to his family initially in a very odd manner. First, a teenage girl, an unwed mother, a virgin at that, joined the family. Then, a nondescript carpenter who was poor as Job's turkey, named Job. Then, some rowdy shepherds. Then, some strangers from another land that could literally have passed for terrorists. Not the first candidates I would have chosen to start my family. Who would you have chosen to start your family, by the way? Well, we all know from backyard football games or from elementary school kickball games, we know exactly what happens. If you're choosing upside, you choose the strongest and the fastest and the smartest and the most talented. And I'm quite certain that neither Mary nor Joseph nor the shepherds nor the wise men had any representation in those groups. The strongest, the fastest, the smartest, the most talented, the most wealthy, the most gifted. None of them were. In fact, at that time, Mary had a reputation. The angel that visited her knew she was a virgin. God and Mary knew that she was a virgin. Not at the time, but later, Joseph knew that she was a virgin. But you can be absolutely sure nobody else in Mary's hometown, family, or anywhere in the surrounding vicinities knew she was a virgin. And that was a very big deal back then, not so much like today. That was a very, very big deal back then, especially in a small town. In fact, I don't know if you've ever thought of this, but years later, 30 years later, when the Jewish leaders threw jabs at Jesus, they said, well, we were not born of fornication. 30 years later. And Mary is still wearing the scarlet letter. In fact, all the first invitees to the manger to join God's family were people with an unsavory reputation. Every single one of them. Take, for example, the shepherds. Shepherds in that society were roughnecks. They were lawbreakers. They were cowboys. They were the ancient equivalent of cowboys or sometimes maybe even gang members. When shepherds came to town, people locked the doors, chain up the donkey, keep your daughter in her room. The sheriffs put on high alert. It reminds me of the defendant who was asked by the judge to explain the charges against him. And the defendant said, well, Judge, I was just doing my Christmas shopping early. And the judge was taken aback and said, well, that's not a crime. How early were you shopping? And he said, well, about 3 hours before the store opened. That could have been shepherds. They had that sort of reputation, as did the wise men. These mysterious riders, we sometimes call them magi, who entered Jerusalem were foreigners, aliens, and there was no immigration to check their credentials at the border. And they dressed in weird clothes, and they had funny hats, and they spoke in a strange language. And the Jews, even the Jewish king, Herod, feared them, was very suspicious of them. These wise men were actually, we're told, from Persia. So they were Babylonians. That went over well. If it were today, it could have been like the Republican Guard from Iran or Hezbollah from the Palestinians. These were the same folks who a few hundred years earlier had ridden into Jerusalem with drawn swords, tore down the walls of the city, set fire to the temple, slaughtered the citizenry, and took off the best and finest as captives. Think about that. And yet, amazingly, God invited them to the incarnation. God invited them to the manger. That's the beatenest thing I've ever seen. First century Jews would have seen this convoy of Oriental magi and accused God of fraternizing with the enemy. What is the God of Israel doing inviting strangers, Babylonians, to join his family? I'll tell you what he was doing. He was doing the same thing with them that he does for you and for me. That's what he was doing. Romans 5 says, since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? That's what he was doing. When God saved you and when God saved me, he also could have been accused of consorting with the enemy because I am a sinner and you're a sinner and none of us are worthy in and of ourselves of the incarnation or of salvation. And yet, that was God's whole purpose in coming. His whole purpose in coming was to unite a family, as our text says, from every race, every tribe, every language, every people on the face of the earth into His eternal and forever family. This past Thursday night, we hosted here in our auditorium the Evangelical Christian School Christmas musical shows for each of the three schools. And so 3 different times through the afternoon and evening, this building was jam-packed, standing room only, wall to wall, 3 different times this past Thursday night for these children's Christmas programs. And these children's Christmas programs are all, you never know what you're going to get, right? You never know what you're going to get. And I heard about one time where the children were reciting the Christmas story sort of in their own words, and the parents and the relatives thought the performance was just absolutely delightful, and all the kids were super cute like they always are. But the little girl who stole the show was the one who kept referring to the Virgin Mary as the Urchin Mary. Every time she said it, she called her the Urchin Mary. The Urchin Mary. Well, do you know what an urchin is? An urchin is I'm reading a direct definition, an uncivilized street kid. Try that on the Catholics. Come on, listen up. Imagine calling Mary an urchin. But the truth is, that was the truth. The truth is, that was the truth. When Jesus was born, Mary and Joseph were at that moment homeless. They were peasants. They had no money, very little place to sleep. They spent the night in a barn. Mary and Joseph and their baby at that moment were among the ranks of the homeless. Very soon they'd be on the run. They were on the lam. They had to flee to Egypt to avoid arrest. The Holy Family of God was on the lam. Yes. In a real sense, the little girl was right. The Virgin Mary was the Urchin Mary. Mary rode to Bethlehem in tattered rags and bedded down to give birth in a feed trough. And 8 days later, rather than offer a lamb for the circumcision, Joseph made the pauper's sacrifice of 2 turtle doves. That's how poor they were. They were displaced, they were disenfranchised, they were poor, and they had just registered for a whole new line of taxes. These were the people whom God used to start a family. The Urchin Mary, old blue-collar Joe, a gang of rowdy shepherds, and a group of Babylonian magi, freakish strangers. Now let that sit for just a minute and realize that rather than go to Jerusalem's religious hierarchy and invite the priests to the manger, rather than invite the king Herod and his royal court to the manger, rather than go to the aristocrats and the bureaucrats and the blue bloods and invite them to the manger, God does the absolute unthinkable. He goes out on society's farthest edges to a peasant couple, to a few grungy shepherds, to some foreign magi, and invites the least deserving and the most surprising of all to be the first one to see his incarnated baby on earth. Wow! That's all you can say about that. And you know what the message of that is? I don't care who you are. I don't care who you are. You are invited to be a part of God's eternal family. Here, my friends, is the glorious truth that jumps off the page. Rich or poor, accepted or despised, stained or innocent, stranger or homeboy, royal or ragged, there's room for you in God's forever eternal family. Every single one of us. During World War II, the families that had sons away on the battlefield would hang a star in the window of their home all over the country. My father was explaining this custom to his little boy when the child then suddenly looked up into the night sky and saw a star in the heavens and said, "Look, Dad, God hung a star in his window. He must have a son in the war too." Yeah, he did. The war against sin. God sent his son into battle. And Jesus fought against bigotry and self-righteousness and doubt and fear and lust and anger and hypocrisy and bitterness and hopelessness and slavery and pride and ultimately against Satan and against sin. And then he took our sin upon his shoulders, paid its penalty in full so that he could reconcile us to God and make us a part of his forever family. That means because of what Jesus did, God buried the hatchet of sin and now holds out for us an olive branch. And God in heaven is willing to let bygones be bygones. He's no longer angry with us over our sin. He's welcoming us. He's waving to us. He's inviting us to embrace him and join his family. He said, if you, by faith, will repent of your sins and be buried with your Lord in baptism for the forgiveness of those very sins, then I will raise you to walk in newness of life, and you will be a part of my forever family in heaven. That's why I came. And when he started a family, he began with a baby. And then he added to his family peasants and carpenters and roughneck shepherds and freaks from another country. And since that night, a little over 2,000 years ago, God has proven over and over and over again that no matter who you are, if you trust and obey Jesus, you can join him in the manger. You can be a part of his family. Realize God's love is a love that's always stooping, it's always reaching, it's always inviting, it's always embracing, and it is never ending. In fact, it's been said, the manger is the one place you're not too bad to get in or too good to stay out. Would you read that aloud with me, please? The manger is the one place you're not too bad to get in or too good to stay out. That's because God was determined to make you a part of his family. This year, if you've yet to get into any of the Christmas spirit, if you've been plugging along but with very little enthusiasm, just sort of ho-hum, humbug type of season, let me make this suggestion to you. Don't just focus on your family. Find another family. That's what the joy is of so many of you who work in the Potterf project at this time of the year, and you're out buying gifts and toys for little children who would have no Christmas other than what we are doing for them. Don't just focus on your family. Let the love of Jesus in you spill over to others. Go out on the edge. Take a trip to the fringe like God did in the beginning. Reach out to somebody on the outside. Be kind to a person that won't be able to return the favor. Show love to the person who's poor or has stained their reputation, or to a rowdy type, or to the guy who's a little weird, or to the family who's foreign to your culture and background, or to the newcomer in the neighborhood. Invite a Mary, invite a Joseph, invite a shepherd, invite a wise man to come and listen about God's family. Give them a gift. Take a chance. And be like the baby in the manger. Be humble and inviting and welcoming and approaching about letting other people into God's family. A few years ago, I clipped a story that I read in Leadership magazine, thinking I'll use it sometime. I had never used it. And I was cleaning out some files the other day, and as I was looking at it, I thought, wow, wow. There was a true story. Wife couldn't think of a gift to give to her husband, Mike. They had just recently attended their son's wrestling match. Their son was in a fairly elite private school, and they were wrestling against an inner city school that had very little resources, and they just wiped out every match. They won easily every single match. And when they went home, Mike, the husband, he was uneasy. He said it was not fair. They did not have the same resources we had. And did you notice the resources and the kind of equipment our kids had as opposed to theirs? And he said, I just wish something could be done about that. And that's when his wife thought, I know something to do about that. She went to a local sporting goods store and bought miscellaneous headgear and wrestling shoes and some other equipment and sent them anonymously to the inner city school's team. Then she put an envelope on her family's Christmas tree telling her husband that what she had done was her gift to him that year. When he opened the note, he couldn't stop crying. It was his favorite gift. It's all he could talk about all day. It's all he could talk about all week. It's all he could talk about for the next month. Well, each year thereafter, the wife followed that tradition she had established. There was an envelope for her husband in the Christmas tree, and it was always a gift to somebody else, reaching out to somebody else's family in his honor and his name. One year they sent a group of mentally challenged kids to a hockey game. Another year, a check went to a family whose house burned down, and on it went, and this went on for more than a decade. And though their children were grateful for their own gifts, every single Christmas, the highlight of Christmas morning was what was in that envelope. It was more important than what anybody else in the entire family had gotten. But wait! The story doesn't end there. She finishes her story. Mike got cancer and died quickly, less than a year before the next Christmas. And when Christmas rolled around, she said, I was so wrapped up in grief, I barely could get the tree up. And yet Christmas Eve found me placing an envelope in the tree. And I went to bed on Christmas Eve, and the next morning when I got up and we gathered for our family get-together, I noticed as the kids came in one by one, unbeknownst one to another, all 4 of their children placed an envelope in that tree. So there were 5 of those gifts for someone else. Because this wife went out of her way the first time to show God's love. She blessed her husband while she was alive, but more importantly, she left a legacy to him even after he was dead, and to his children, and I would be willing to bet to their children, for generations to come. Now, that could be you. She followed the footsteps of a God who left heaven and climbed into a manger and reached out in love. And as a result of what Jesus did today, God's whole family in heaven and on earth bears his name. That's what Ephesians 3:14 says. Let me close with one final story told by another mom who attended her son's grade school Christmas program. You can just see this happening, any of you who've ever been to one of these. When her son's class rose to sing the song entitled Christmas Love, the children brought to the platform placards with different letters printed on them, and they were lined up in order to where, as they turned over the placard, it spelled the word. And so they lined up in order, turned over the placards, revealing the succeeding letter in each word, Christmas Love. When the card C was flipped, everyone said in unison, C is for Christmas. And the next kid turned over the H, and everybody said, H is for happy. And it went on with each and every letter. But when the kid holding the M turned his over, he accidentally had it upside down so that it was a W. And everybody snickered and laughed, and nobody knew what to say because there was no W word in the script. That is, until they all got the rest of the letters revealed. And what it read was, Christ was love. What everybody assumed had been a bad mistake was the greatest message the world has ever known or ever will be. Christ was love. And Christ, in his love, came to this earth first as a baby for the purpose of establishing a family, the family of God, a forever family, an eternal family. And whether you're a young poor girl with a bad reputation at the time, or a very poor carpenter who can't even afford the proper fee for the circumcision and to the priest, or a shepherd, or even a foreign, alien, wise man, or you, or me, God invites us into his family, a forever family.